Hey everybody, today is Monday, April 14th, 2025. Coming up on the show today, from the HBO Max series The Pitt, editor Mark Strand.
The first real professional footage I ever saw was the ACE editing competition. You know, we had that footage in our school, and it was of an ER show. That was the first stuff I had ever seen. And so to even be working on anything that even is similar to that just feels really like it's come full circle for me, and it's been fun.
Editor Lauren Pendergrass.
Noah is so good with both the dialogue and the props of medical that I swear you could say, okay, you're going to take the blood pressure with your right arm. Like, here's a whole bunch of medical jargon. If you could start an IV with your left foot and juggle with the other hand, and then also cross from here to here, that'd be soups.
Editor Joey Reinisch.
I could count on one hand the amount of times where I ran into issues with timing based on that background stuff. Everyone is just so on point. They run it like a play.
And editor Annie Eifrig.
It was easy to cut on those levels, like you're saying, no problems to fix or cut around somebody, no endless, like finding the right delivery of the line. You know, it was just like, there's the line 8 times. Which one do you want? You know?
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. What's this? Another episode of the podcast in less than 3 weeks? That's certainly a trend in the right direction. I cannot deny that new episodes of the show have been infrequent, to say the least, over the past couple of months. But let us not dwell on the past. Let's get down to the business of today. Because today, we are talking about The Pitt. The Pitt is a new medical drama on HBO Max that examines the challenges facing healthcare workers in America, as seen through the lens of the heroic frontline workers working in a modern-day hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. See, there's where we get the Pitt from. The show stars Noah Wyle, among others. Now, you may be thinking, haven't I seen Noah Wyle in a medical drama before? Might have been a little while ago. And you'd be right. Noah Wyle starred in over 250 episodes of the NBC series ER. Well, he is back again in another medical drama, and he's brought some of his ER pals with him. ER showrunner John Wells is a producer on The Pitt, and ER writer Scott Gemmill is the showrunner. Knowing that, you'd think The Pitt was a lot like ER, and you'd be wrong. In fact, The Pitt really isn't like any medical drama you've seen before, or at least I've seen before. Its 15 episodes chronicle the 15 hours in the day of an extended shift for the doctors, nurses, orderlies, and others in the Pittsburgh Trauma Medical Hospital. The show has garnered, and yes, that would mark the first time I've ever said the word garnered, a tremendous amount of praise for just about every aspect about it, including the authenticity. And being so authentic can make it a tough watch at times. Don't get me wrong, it is a fantastic show. But getting through it without having your emotions put through the ringer every now and then is not likely. And the same would certainly be true if you're an editor on the series. We are very fortunate to have with us today all the editors of The Pitt, which would be Mark Strand, Lauren Pendergrass, Joey Reinisch, and Annie Eifrig. Here's a spoiler for you. I had a lot of fun talking to them. I think you'll enjoy this one. It has everything. Just like The Pitt, it has drama, it has laughter, it has tears, it has a tireless crew that works together to accomplish great things. It has sanitation workers who insist on picking up the trash when I'm trying to conduct an interview. Yes, we're going to hear about all those things in just a moment. But first, a few words about our friends and sponsor Extreme Music. Now, if you've ever spent way too much time hunting for the perfect track, I've got good news. Extreme Music is here to save you from the black hole of endless scrolling. They have built an enormous library of original music from top-tier composers from around the world. And more importantly, they've made it smart, really smart to navigate. In fact, you've got 3 powerful ways to find your sound. First, you can do a traditional search using musical metadata. Everything from tempo and instrumentation to composer and mood. Second, you can describe your scene or the emotion you're trying to convey and let their artful intelligence come back with tracks that hit the mark. And third, this would be my personal favorite, you can upload a reference track to Extreme Music and let their system find songs that match its vibe, so you're not starting from scratch. Extreme Music also gives you tools like their amazing stem mixer, which lets you dial in just the instruments you want. And do not forget their super straightforward licensing. No headaches, no hoops to jump through, just premium production music served up quick and easy. So if you're working in film or TV and you want your soundtrack to sound its very best, you just gotta go see those musical geniuses at Extreme Music. Now then, without further ado, today's featured attraction. From the Max original series The Pitt, here are editors Mark Strand, Lauren Pendergrass, Joey Reinisch, and Annie Eifrig.
supposed to be.
I can see Joey's your guy for like all right, how do we get out of this? Just make Joey answer. I always try and do a little research and figure out ahead of time any possible connections from past gigs that have led editors to be on the show or film we're talking about. And for you, Mark, it looks like producer John Wells, who you worked with on Animal Kingdom, might be the key. Regardless, give me the breakdown of how you got to be on the Pitt, the interview process, and how you were pitched the show.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I've been working with John for like 8 years. This was the third pilot I did for him. It was actually funny to even get Animal Kingdom. I'd seen season 1 and I really wanted the show. So I interviewed for it and got it, but I had to like wait 6 months before the show started. And so I was like picking up any job I could get. So I cut Logo's Gay Bachelor. It was, I forget, Finding Prince Charming, I think it was called. And so I spent 6 months on Finding Prince Charming so I could have 8 years with John Wells. So our relationship has gone back a long way.
Annie, I think you have a connection with John Wells too. Is that right?
Yeah, I worked with John and Molly Metzler on Maid. So I did the Maid pilot, and it was one of the first shows up during pandemic. So it was really like a wild time to meet John and work with him and try to find his pace and everything, because we were working remote and distance and all this crazy stuff. So I was super lucky to work with him on that and had that connection with him and Terry Murphy, his post-producer, who's incredible, keeps all the ships running. So doing Maid and this show has been like some of the best work that John's been doing. I mean, Mark would have more, like the longevity of Mark's experience with John is incredible. But I do think you walk into these situations with John and it's just like, he just is really, really a great top-notch storyteller.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about John is that he is, and actually the entire show of The Pitt is what I'm sure we will all like sort of echo, which is like, John is just so pro level, and everybody, Scott Gemmill, Joe Sachs, Noah Wyle, like every department head, everybody was firing on all cylinders and pitching strikes. And so in pretty much every show with John, those are sort of the people you're working with. And it's one of the reasons why I've been with him for so long. And it does, like we were saying, make our lives a lot easier to be working with everybody doing that. And to your point a little bit earlier about, when you are getting the best footage and the best actors and the great scripts, does it make our editing life easier? It does, for sure. But it also allows us to make editorial decisions based on story rather than based on hiding stuff. So it just makes our job, yes, easier, but also more specific. And it is such a joy to cut footage on a show like this.
Yeah. Okay. Over to you, Joey. Tell us your story about getting on the show.
I actually just had a random interview.
Did they know you were coming in?
Yes, they did. I actually interviewed for a different John show, and I had worked with a couple people in the John Wells orbit, but never with John himself. And was kind of waiting to find out how that show panned out. And then The Pitt came up. He tossed my resume over to Terry, and Terry had worked with someone who had worked with me over on Better Call Saul. And I think I just had worked with enough people that were involved in this show that could say nice things about me. And then just kind of worked out.
Okay. Well, speaking of saying nice things, Lauren, I'd love to hear about your story.
I actually have really good agents, Frank Welkin and Brian Goldberg at WPA, and they had pitched me, and it was kind of like we were coming out of the strike, and there was no work. And so I had said to Frank, like, okay, well, how do I get this? And he's like, well, make sure that everybody on the call has gotten a rec for you. And so I basically just tapped my entire network. So by the time I got on there, almost everybody like was chiming in, like, oh, I heard from so-and-so, I got an email from so-and-so. Particular Noah Wyle had worked with my friend Martina Lee. And then John Wells piped up and basically was like, well, I don't know who you are. And I was like, well, John, my network only goes so far. And apparently everybody thought that was very funny. So then the rest of the interview went pretty well, So he was the only one I kind of couldn't get that was on there, because my network does only go so far. Apparently, now I would just call up Marky Mark and just say, hey, you've worked with this guy for 8 years. But it was, just a classic interview. And sometimes you go into these things, I think, thinking, oh, they've already got somebody picked. Like, I'm just there to fill out the roster. And, both Joey and I can say, well, that's not true. They're actually looking to fill a position. And if you put your best foot forward, you never know,
You never know.
Yeah.
Well, John and Noah Wyle, not to mention the showrunner Scott, have ties to the NBC medical drama ER, which ran from 1994 to 2009. God, did I get old?
What is this show? No, I'm kidding.
This show, ER.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Okay, so to that point, John claims in interviews that there is no connection here to be made to ER. But for the four of you, did you look at ER or any other medical drama or any kind of show really for inspiration as to how you'd approach cutting this one?
I actually did not.
Have you never seen ER, Joey, you young jerk?
I wasn't around when ER was on. I've seen sections of it, but never went back and watched all of it. And then when the Pitt came up, I kind of didn't want to on purpose.
Yeah.
Because they were wanting to try something different from all the other medical shows. And I wanted to kind of go in fresh.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go in with kind of the pattern and the style already predefined because I didn't know what it was going to be like.
Yeah. I mean, even in our interview, we did talk about it. You know, you're interviewing with Scott and Noah, right? And so ER is like right in your mug. And, you know, I was just sort of saying to them, like, how is this not going to be like ER? And so in that conversation, they were pitching me all the different ways that it was different and distinct. You know, it's so interesting because Noah mentioned, what was the film about the Nazi security guard who lived right across, or maybe he was running the concentration camp?
Zone of interest.
Zone of interest. He kept talking about zone of interest and sort of that idea of that you would move through space and you would move through time and everything would continue going on. And that was always one of the founding sort of conceits of this show. And so it was very clear from the beginning with me that that's what we were making and that we were all trying to do something that we hadn't done before, we hadn't seen before, even though, you know, I was in film school when ER came out. The first real professional footage I ever saw was the ACE editing competition. You know, we had that footage in our school and it was of an ER show. That was the first stuff I had ever seen. And so to even be working on anything that even is similar to that just feels really like it's come full circle for me and it's been fun.
Yeah. And I would say, like, for me, ER wasn't really part of the conversation. It was more that Mark had done such an interesting pilot. That's what we were referencing. You know, Mark and I had talked about it, but the pilot is aggressively off camera in a very interesting way that I was in television not used to. And certainly I you know, ER is in no way that at all.
Yeah.
You know, it's much more standard. So yeah, I mean, I think we were, at least from my point of view, because I wasn't involved in those initial conversations, you know, by the time we came on, we had a template and the template didn't look like ER at all.
Yeah, I totally second that. Watching and talking with Mark about the pilot was so exciting. I mean, like watching it and then getting to talk with you about it was so exciting because you could see how hard it was to get that feel and that look. So to come into it and be like, well, he did the hard lifting and now I just have to like follow that.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, it was. I mean, for me, because I'm not, you know, I think I'm much more like an indie film wild. I'm not super great at traditional stuff. So for me, it was really exciting to just be like, whatever goes. And you sort of follow this crazy good production too. I mean, that production team is insane.
Here's our first tangent of the day. Lauren, please explain or explore further aggressively off camera.
Well, I mean, you know, television is typically cut to the person that's talking, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's good storytelling. You know, we act like these rules, sometimes we act like the rules don't come from somewhere. You know, if we're in a room, a cocktail party, your eyeballs will go to the person who's talking, right? But in this case, I felt like we did end up with a lot, and I probably have more on camera than some of these other editors just because, like, I can't. Old habits die hard, but you're telling more stories than just the audio. And sometimes you can have more storytelling streams when you show something. You're giving the audio of the dialogue here, but you can show something else. And then you can tell other stories. So at the same time, or more complicated stories. And sometimes it's more interesting to see how, you know, people are reacting. And certainly I think Mark had said, which I thought was very smart, you know, medical off-camera drama or emotion on camera, which is to say that this is not an instructional medical video. That's not this. You know, we care about relationships, how people are reacting to things, how people are feeling about things, more than we care about the end-all be-all of, there's a Wikipedia for that. Like, if you need to know about this, like, particular medical condition.
I got to tell you, I use that Wikipedia a lot when they just, because they were just saying medical terms and I was just like, wait, what are they talking about?
Well, I mean, I'm a former nurse and sometimes I'm like, really? Okay, sure. Like, let's go, you know, but actually they were, you know, because they work so hard to keep things accurate. There was medical that was going on the show that was more up to date than my education. because we do have so many people in there who really know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, beyond the tense medical procedures and the emotional roller coaster that goes with their outcomes, is there anything the show is trying to say or convey to the audience beyond just telling a great story?
Medical care in this country is a problem.
I think that's what makes this show special, is it's not glossy. It doesn't make this seem like a glamorous job. It shows how hard it really is compared to, music swells and beautiful shots and romance and stuff. It's hard, and it's hard all the time.
You are a crew of 4, which is not unusual for a TV show, but 4 is about a third of the number of main characters you have to balance in this show. On a slower paced show, even half that number of characters would be difficult to introduce and track. But considering how quickly the show moves, it seems like a really big challenge. What was your collective approach to making sure that the audience had a decent chance to get familiar with everyone and to create the right balance of the characters throughout the series?
I mean, it's so hard, right? And especially it is a slow burn, basically, is sort of how I approached it, certainly with the pilot, which was in the pilot, we are getting to know Robbie. We're going to see the faces of the first years. And it was sort of top down, right? So let's spend our time with Robbie. Let's get to know Robbie. Then we're going to introduce Langdon and Collins because they're the next ones down. I mean, the scripts were doing this as well, where it's only investigating those relationships at first. And then it broadens out to now we're going to get to know who Javadi is and who McKay is and what her backstory is. That was really well designed in the scripts so that visually and just sort of how much time we were spending with these people, certainly in the pilot, I felt like the students were a gaggle. There were 3 students and they were almost always together, and I could use them in a 3-shot or even 2 shots that were going to pan. So I could separate them. Whereas with Robbie, I was always up in Robbie's mug. And so then as the show progressed, as we got to know those characters, we're climbing in closer with those characters. And so I think that was sort of certainly from my approach. And again, a lot of that came out of just how are they weighing the storylines in the scripts. But that's visually and editorially, that's how I was approaching it.
Yeah, I would say the script just made it easy to follow. I got to see this person. And the episode I did was so absolute chaos of who was where. I had to follow just based on dialogue and where that character was going, who we were tracking. And that was all. The characters were so established by the time we get to 13 that it was just a little bit of who's talking and who are we following to which area. And it was so well established by that point. I didn't really have any trouble cutting to maintain the characters in the moment they were supposed to be focused.
I don't envy the assistants having to cut some of those recaps, though.
For sure. Yeah.
Particularly at the beginning of the season where they're trying to establish 8 people in a recap. You're trying to kind of help them by making a list of beats. And then you would be like, good luck. Also, if you can keep it under 45, that'd be great.
I think the recap to 13 was a minute 15.
Yeah, it's just at some point, you're just I don't know what to tell you. If every character in this is on screen for exactly 1 second, that's 38 seconds already. That's where we are. If you want them to say anything, it's longer.
Well, I can scratch that question. Who does the recaps? Because I have the same note.
Some very beleaguered assistants that we probably all owe coffee bean gift cards.
Yeah. And we should call them out by name. My assistant's name's Emily Merriman. She's incredible.
Yeah.
Joey's is Ross. I actually don't know what Ross's last name is.
It's Woldridge.
Yeah. And the fabulous and talented Philip Trudeau.
They were great.
I don't think I'm telling tales out of school to say that you never really hear it in the finished episode, but so often in these podcasts, somebody says, and I just have to shout out my talented first assistant, Pete, and then there's a long pause when they realize I don't know Pete's last name. Happens almost every episode. Sorry, past guests, but it's true.
And kudos to you, Mark, because that was lovely. Thank you. Thank you for keeping us as lovely as we think we are.
The entire season takes place over the course of a single 15-hour emergency department shift at the fictional Pittsburgh Trauma Medical Hospital. Each episode represents 1 hour from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Going into the show, did you have any thoughts about how that construct might affect your role as editors? Any challenges or benefits you could see coming from that way of building the world?
Unfairly, I sort of felt like it was a gimmick and I was a little nervous about it, but I was just totally wrong. Basically, I was nervous about not time cutting and not being able to create tension with jump cuts or pace or slow stuff down, like not having that ability to slow and ratchet stuff up within the time space. I am totally impressed with the scripts and how sticking with them and moving through space adds so much to the tension. And I've definitely learned a lot about that as I was cutting the pilot. And then, I mean, I think there are maybe, I don't know, I think my episodes had maybe 3 time cuts in all of the 6 I did. And sometimes I'm very surprised when I watch someone else's and there is a time cut and I feel it and I'm like, wait, oh my gosh, a time cut. That just seems so odd. So I was a little bit leery of it at first, but definitely embraced it. And I'm such a huge fan of it now that I really enjoyed moving through spaces with characters and what that meant to A, the story they were leaving, and B, the story they were approaching.
I was concerned about just mismatching. You're shooting these things where somebody walks out of one thing and walks into the other. And I think because production had made the decision to shoot in order, that minimized. There was a couple of those where, you know, scene 17, they did the night before, and scene 18, they did the morning of, and you're like, okay, sure. But overall, I think that was really minimized by the production decision.
That is a really good point, though. Like the assistant directors, like navigating the extras in the background. I will call myself out. I won't tell you which episode, but there is one episode in which Javadi's mother leaves the scene 3 times in different angles from different spaces. And hopefully no one has noticed, but I noticed. And I was watching with my wife and I was like, did you see that? Did you see that? And she was like, see what? And I was like, nothing. It looks great. But they did such a good job. And they also did this thing, which is a little unusual, which was that they would fully reset everybody for every take. So you'd end up, I remember when Joey came in to do episode 2, he came in and he's like, wait a minute, I don't understand. This footage, it doesn't matter until like late in the take. And I was like, oh yeah, they're resetting. They would reset every take because they have to move entirely through the entire space. And so to make sure that all the extras and everybody was in sync at about the same time, they actually had to do full resets. And so we were getting this footage that was really long takes. And then all of a sudden they'd come in and then you'd be like, oh, this is what the piece of footage is for. And so that was an unusual thing that they did, but it also worked out because then now we're getting people to land in the background, or if they push a gurney away here and now we're cut over to the other side of the room, we're seeing them continuing their movement in the background. And it made all the difference in the world.
The background organization of all the patients and the other nurses and doctors, like, can't be overstated how impressive that whole system is.
Unreal.
That could have been a nightmare.
Yeah.
But I could count on one hand the amount of times where I ran into issues with timing based on that background stuff. Everyone is just so on point. They run it like a play. It just goes and everybody is on their mark and doing what they're supposed to do. So it makes our job, like Mark said earlier, we get to focus on the story and not cutting around problems. And with a set and a scope that large, it's crazy that they are able to do it as well as they are.
And not just the set in the background. I mean, like, no line flubs. So marginal line flubs where they're resetting or the actor had to stop and they reset themselves. I just couldn't believe this team of, like, especially with the complicated dialogue, come in, nail it every time, do the same action on every, and Mark said too, like, you're just operating at this level where everybody's at the top of their game. And so it was easy to cut on those levels. Like you're saying, no problems to fix or cut around somebody, no endless, like finding the right delivery of the line. It was just like, there's the line 8 times. Which one do you want?
Well, and I think that, you were asking earlier about the ER effect. And I do think one of the big things that I see from ER is just that Noah is so good with both the dialogue and the props of medical that I swear you could say, okay, you're going to take the blood pressure with your right arm. Like, here's a whole bunch of medical jargon. If you could start an IV with your left foot and juggle with the other hand, and then also cross from here to here, that'd be soups, and I think he would be like, not got it, yeah, got it. I mean, we didn't have usually when you have this amount of props, you end up with prop resets, which was, and he's talking about line resets. I didn't see a lot of those, and I didn't see a lot of prop resets. And that's tough. I mean, to be spitting out this jargon and then also, dealing with a whole bunch of sterilized plastic things that, the med tech is telling you have to be done this particular way or else you look like an idiot.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the rehearsal, Mark may know more of that than I do. Like, again, like how much rehearsal time there was on set, but I know that some of the bigger sequences, they did have prep days for. They would mark out an hour or so the day before to prep for it.
As I understand it, Joe Sachs would take them, or somebody would take them for all the medical, not only jargon, but because obviously they would work on the words, but also the physicality and the choreography of you put the tube in here, you do all this. And all of that had been worked out before on the day with the director on the set for sort of camera blocking and that. So they did get extra rehearsal time. It's also always been, since literally ER, John is a terrific producer on top of everything else that he's good at. And one of those things that he does is that he has everybody off book. There are no sides on set. All the actors have to know their lines. And it makes for a more efficient day, and it makes for everyone being there. And so when you have Noah as the acting leader, who is right there and has been doing it forever, everybody else is just falling in line behind him. And that all comes from the top.
Okay, so the first listener that writes me correctly identifying the scene of Mark's where Javadi's mother leaves 3 times, you get an Avid water bottle. Well, Mark, you did say something, I think you're talking about some work that Joey did, the time cut part of it. I mean, you get so caught up in the action and the emotion of the show that it's hard to really get a sense of how things are playing out in a way that, would this fit in a 1-hour block? When you're cutting this show, was that something you tried to pay much attention to, or did you just let the story be the story and not worry about if the audience was checking the clock?
No, we didn't have that sort of 24 tick, 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 let's throw the clock up. And I spent no time. I spent a lot of time on the feel and no time on the literal. So there's literally things happening at the same time. Like if you go back and sort of like, and I'm sure somebody will, because it's, there's the internet. But if you go back and you're like, wait a minute. So that means that when Robbie was doing this, Samira must have been doing this. And the answer is, yeah. This action in this room over here is actually happening at the same time as something else we just watched and Robbie walked out. And then we're finishing this up. We end up with somebody else. And then eventually we connect back to Robbie. And if you were to really map it out, they happened at the same time. And I spent very little time thinking about that. And I felt much more time about how it felt. Do you feel present and active?
Totally funny, because I literally never thought about that either. And then I'm like, wait a minute, if anybody tracks time of death, right? Especially like, I don't know who, like I know there were some other time of deaths, but there's a very clear one in 13. And I'm like, ooh, I didn't like actually see if that hit in the right time.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, yeah. I didn't even think about that. Like, does it clock in? Yeah.
Does her time of death actually match where we would technically be?
Right.
I spent zero time, just like Mark did.
I'll go back and watch it now, and I'll text you and tell you how you did.
Tell me how I missed it.
Yeah. But I will say Joe Sachs, I mean, if you ever get the luxury of meeting Joe Sachs, the dude is on it. Like if there's anything, there's no question that Joe Sachs, who is one of the co-executive producers and in the writer's room and the medical supervisor, he knew not only every single patient, where every single patient was during every scene, where they were moving, if they should be coming across in the background, who was coming in, what time they were coming in, what patient number they were. He had it all mapped.
I loved sitting with him and doing the whole like Joe medical pass on the cut was like so much fun.
I had done 5 seasons or 4 seasons or something of New Amsterdam. I love New Amsterdam, and it was just a very different show. And so the approach to medical, Joe really, really wants it to be accurate. And the difference between on film something being right versus something being correct, he wants it to be correct.
Listen, I'll tell you, the internet seems to agree with Joe.
Yeah. I have immense respect for that, because you're often fighting storytellers who, don't care about the reality of it.
Yeah.
And they seem to manage to thread that line in a way that I think is very special.
So I think you'll appreciate the spirit of this next question. And I'm going to couch it by saying, obviously your show is very popular, has a lot of fans. And a friend of mine is a fan of the show. And I mentioned I was going to be talking to you about editing this show. And the friend said, well, how hard can it be? The characters wear the same clothes throughout the whole series. And I thought, it's an interesting way of looking at it. The fact that it does take place pretty much all in one location on one day. Does that give you some added flexibility to move conversations or story beats between different episodes if you have to?
I don't know if that happened to anybody else, but I think in general, no, because things were so interconnected. Like Robbie was over here, now he's over here. You can't move a beat of this anywhere else. That patient's already moved there. There was stuff in the background we were talking earlier about, like people moving, where that's how that patient crossed, and 2 episodes later, that patient isn't here anymore. I mean, so no, I don't think, was there anything in you guys' episodes that really moved?
Yeah, there's a scene, and it was scripted in 13. Robbie is moving through a room, and Mel and one of the patients are in the room, and they're having a very quiet, emotional conversation. And in the episode 13, it stopped the gas on what 13 needed to do, because we really needed to be focused on Robbie and his arc leading to his breakdown. And so that scene really, really just did not work. And so they made the decision to pull it and to incorporate that part of the story into 14, which I'm sure is going to work great.
Yeah, and because of, like you said, with the clothing and kind of the sets all being the same, it integrated fine. I'm not going to say specifically which scene because I hope it works and you won't be able to tell. But, I think in the bulk of the other episodes, all we could do really was omit stuff for time. We didn't really swap stuff around because, like Lauren said, it can get kind of tricky with how choreographed the entire show is. And it just worked in this one instance.
Yeah, I moved around some of the, within its own episode, I moved around some of an individual storyline. So the daughter who'd come in for an abortion, some of her storylines got wiggle-woggled within the episode.
That's right.
The one thing I did do, which was a lifesaver, is we did cut, because obviously the thing we do more is there's a little bit of time cutting or whatever. And so then all of a sudden it's like, can you get Robbie out of this room? And I was able to steal a shot of Robbie walking out of trauma in obviously the same clothes, in obviously this, manner. And I did steal a shot from one of Joey's shows, maybe, to get Robbie out of the room.
Oh,
I think John had mentioned at one point, though, that they said something to the actors at the beginning, like, how do you feel about this facial hair? Like, how do you feel about this?
This is it.
This is it. Like, you don't get to change it, So I think he mentioned that something that they did them the favor.
I had McKay reached out to Terry and asked if she could change her shoes after the pilot because she didn't think they were comfortable enough. And did we show her shoes? Yeah. And I was like, we're good. She can show her.
Yeah. She can get some better arch support.
If she's gonna have to wear it for the whole season, let her change her shoes.
Well, you've credited, and I think fairly so, production with managing the geographic relationships. But honestly, that was one of my takeaways. Not the clothes, but because the environment that you're in, where the way those characters are moving around so chaotically, managing the geography of it, to me, looked like a real challenge. And I didn't think that because you didn't do it well. I knew it would be hard, and you certainly did it very well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I find it nice to be complimentary to my guests. The episodes actually last longer. When I watched the show, in a lot of ways, it felt like an action movie. I mean, you have these set pieces, but instead of car chases, you have these tense medical procedures that play out at a very rapid pace. And these are played against, of course, dramatic moments between characters. Except in an action movie, there are longer breaks in the action. Here, due to the nature of where this show occurs, the action almost never stops. Just tell me a little bit about the difficulty of balancing that almost relentless tension against the quieter moments that are ultimately what drive the narrative and fill in the characters.
Yeah, I'm sorry to always chime in first, but only because the pilot is where we sort of were investigating some of those feelings. And again, you had to embrace the human story within the action and within the emotion. So while the pace was sped up, hopefully you were still clocking and tracking the emotional human stories. So yes, we spent a lot of time on gear shifting and how is the ballet of camera work and actor blocking and choreography of scenes, how are they all interplaying to try to just give that essence of continuous motion and then downshift in and let Whitaker be funny. Let Mohan be serious. Let Mel be quirky and connected. And so once we got into who those characters were, those gear shifts were defined, I think, by their performances and the scripts.
To even elaborate on that a little bit, I think the camera work and the way that those trauma scenes feel really allows you to get to know the characters in kind of a different way than I've seen before, because they really make you feel like you are up in there with the doctors around these patients. The subtlest of things can kind of give you hints to these characters, and they dole those out across the season. you gradually get to know these people just because you feel like you kind of were working with them for episodes at a time. So there's a really tight economic storytelling character introduction thing happening in each of those scenes, just with a subtle expression or how somebody responded in these trauma scenes. So it feels very much like you just want us cutting and the audience to feel like we are up in there with them. And then you get to know these people.
Yeah, character through action, I think was what he was trying to say, which was what I was going to say too. A character in their actions, not so much in what they're like the quieter moments too.
I think John has a really amazing sense too of like, we were working on something and he was like, get out of that much quicker. And because he was like, you know, you're exhausting your audience with this over emotionality if you're staying in it too long. And I'm sure, Mark, you guys must have talked about this, but it really was like his sense of like how long you should stick with an emotional moment. It was new for me because I'm definitely overindulgent, right? I'll stay on somebody crying because I'm like so emotional, you know, and he was like, get out, you know?
Get it out. Get it into Joey's episode. Send it to Joey.
Yeah, send it to Joey. No, John does not like gilding the lily.
No.
Never wants to do it. Anything, you know. I had the scene with Mel and the dog.
Oh, it was adorable.
And I had ended on a shot of her petting the dog or something. He said, lose that shot. And I said, oh, really? And he said, either that or my name on the front.
Wow.
I was like, all right, we really didn't like that one. Goes away. Never mind. Whose idea was that?
Seriously, the things he says are so funny.
You know, he's hilarious. But the sentimentality to your point, he wants to make it, and then he wants to anything else starts to feel saccharine to him, I think.
He gives the audience a lot of credit.
Yeah, again, trusting them to clue it in, doesn't need to hit you over the head with it. And then I know in a couple of my episodes, you were talking about like, when do you balance the action and when do you have these conversations? He very much felt like if we had already mentioned something, you know, before 2 episodes ago, whatever, it was definitely on the chopping block, even if the scene was good or the dialogue or the performance. He was like, no, we already said it. And again, that's trust of the audience. It's not treating it like you were feeding the dog and you were making dinner and on your phone at the same time. He's treating the audience as you're keeping up. And that was interesting.
I think it's an interconnected web also where we're going so fast in the trauma action space that even a little bit of a slowdown, it's doing the job. The overindulgence is also removed by some of the distinctions between the two paces of the show. So that's part of it. You know, I did Nip Tuck, which was an arch melodrama, soapy, and, you know, we'd spend 40 minutes on a cutaway to someone's reaction, and then we'd climb into the next piece. And so with this stuff, you just got to move. And then that stuff really, I find the stuff really lands. I find not having music, that stuff really lands. All of those factors that are allowing it to play realer and shorter, and hopefully, you know, the audience is with us.
That's very smart. So like if you're going 100 miles an hour and you slow down to 60, it feels like you're practically stopping. That's really smart.
Well, let's build off some of the concepts that you all just said. I mean, we're talking a lot about pacing. Annie, I think you used the expression exhausting the audience. Lauren, you're talking about trusting the audience. A concept an editor introduced me to a long time ago was cognitive load, always being aware of what you're burdening the audience with. Even binging this show, which I did, so much happens that it's possible to forget a smaller story beat that might have taken place, according to the clock, just an hour or so earlier in the, quote, day. How do you work together to make sure that storylines don't get dragged out too far or too much happens between the time you revisit a storyline? Because there's so much going on in this show in what is supposed to be a very tight amount of time.
We talk to each other.
I was going to say, I didn't talk to anybody. I ignored everybody's advice. Whatever, you guys. I don't know what you're doing.
Same as any other show. You're knocking on their door going, hey, in one of your episodes, did this thing happen? Because I don't remember.
Who is this guy? When did he show up at the hospital? I didn't read your script. When's your cut going to be done? I want to watch your cut so I can know what happens in my cut.
Right?
To elaborate a little more, and in somewhat of my defense, I mean, you have things like the character, the Kraken, or is it Myrna, I think is her name. You have the rats that escape. You have the young man who the drug overdose is brain dead, and then that gets spaced out a little bit. I mean, a lot of things happen between when he first is admitted, between when his walk of honor or something like that.
The honor walk.
The honor walk, yeah.
I had a lot of, I'm not going to say I got the worst because Joey and the kid might have been the worst, the child who drowned. But, I had an awful lot of overdose kid, and they gave me a lot of Myrna to balance it, I think.
Yeah.
I did get a lot of Myrna. I think there were cases where we also were accepting, if you're talking about like a storyline going on too long, I mean, there were cases where we were accepting that this is the reality of it. I think that the kid, went on quite a lot of episodes.
Yeah.
And you were giving the audience a lot of load. And we just discussed that this is the reality of how this goes. And it's exhausting. We played any of that exhaustion on Robbie. This is how it's hitting him.
One of the techniques that I use is I'll get my first pass up on its feet, and I will be talking to everybody as I'm doing it, like, oh, wait, what's going on with the storyline or whatever? Or like, how heavy have you hit this? What is Tracy doing about this or whatever? And then I will, once I have my full assembly up, let's say I'm cutting 10. So I watch 8, 9, and then I watch my assembly to make sure it's feeling, that story arc is feeling like it's hitting a target. And then I adjust my edits based on what they've done. And dude, the fact that you binge, I mean, I'm crying and, oh, what is Joey doing to me? Oh, Lord, it's killing me. And then I'm into my episode and I'm like, wait, how is anyone going to binge this series? Like, it's just too emotionally grueling.
That's one of the last questions is like, I binged it. I don't know that I recommend that.
Yeah.
I'm going to call out Joey for being as lovely as he is, because there was one day where he was working, where he had a post-it on his door that said, working all the feelings or something. And it had a frowny face on there. So it was something like that. I'm misquoting what it actually said, but basically it was like, stay away. I'm not in a good place.
I just didn't want people to walk in and see me like,
I was like, oh my gosh, I need to, like, there was so many shows that I've worked on that I need this like laminated as a placard. Because you are in there, like kind of like feeling your own thing. So yeah, so you don't recommend binging. Like maybe it's a 2 episodes a night kind of a thing?
I think so. I mean, I didn't watch all 15 straight. That would be pretty, I mean, that would be a commitment. Ugh.
Okay.
I watched, I think, in like 3 separate blocks.
Ooh, that's
and
a lot.
It's an expertly crafted show, but it's a lot to process because poor Joey, I get why he put that sign on the door. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
I need some time to myself.
Well, ultimately, too, I think that that's so much like what Scott and John and Joe are doing. Like they're arcing everything to Robbie's, like, I can't do this, right? And I think we were talking earlier about the show and its impact and why it's so popular. And I do think one of the biggest things, like what I loved about Made and I love about this show is the people not in the business that it impacts. The fact that you've got all these nurses and doctors going, ooh, we're seen, we're valued. They're like, they love the show, and people being like, here are good people trying to do good things instead of just whatever, shoot them up, kill people, jump off a boat, whatever, like nasty things. I just think like it's such a important show that it resonates with people, and that we're all kind of like exhausted, right? Like a little bit in the world, that there is this sort of like emotional exhaustion and compassion we need to bring to each other. And I felt that with just in this little edit team, right? It's like there was a great deal of compassion with each other. I felt, you guys were really generous with me coming in, and Mark and Joey both watched my first cut and helped me a lot. So, I mean, I just think that it like permeates the whole show.
Well, I think too, it was one of the first times that the reality in healthcare is that the distinction between doctors and nurses is really going away, right? Like, and certainly in any sort of a trauma environment, it's an all hands on deck kind of a thing. And with nurse practitioners, the distinctions and television in particular, but also films have long since kind of been like, and then the doctor comes in the room and gives while the nurses are standing around, like, I don't know, filling out paperwork. And it's like, that's in no way the way that it's done, and in no way the way that it actually works. And I think one of the things I really enjoyed about doing this show was I hope that the healthcare providers of this country en masse feel seen. Because the Mateos and the Danas and they're keeping things running, even down to one of the cleaning teams. Anybody who's employed in this space, hopefully we gave you a little bit of love.
When I was watching the screeners, because the show's not done running right now, I was warned that the finale I was about to watch was a work in progress and the effects would be temp. And I have to say, I couldn't see anything missing. No screens that needed to be replaced or unfulfilled chroma keys. Maybe the warning was unnecessary and you actually were done. But is there any considerable temp VFX work that you have to do on a show like this?
A lot of the gore and the medical, that happens on set and looks amazing and horrible in all the ways it should by the time it gets to us, which contributes to the draining nature of the show. It's not gunfights or huge drug deals or anything. It's stuff that happens 100 times a minute everywhere. And it's just, it hits so much different than anything else I've ever worked on, that signs like the one Lauren was talking about, it wasn't a joke. It sounds like it was a joke, but it wasn't a joke because it is a very exhausting space to live in and try to work on that long. Like in a great way, but it can be exhausting.
Well, whether it's this show or another, what do the four of you do in scenarios like that where you're so emotionally and intellectually invested in the material you're working on that you need a break? You need some way to sort of do a reset yourself or clear your head. Do you have any techniques or methods that you employ in those situations?
I employ the Warner Brothers gymnasium, and I go and I work out. And these guys will attest, because I think like Annie's first week, she never saw me at lunch. And she's like, where's Mark? Why does he not come to lunch? And I just get out of the room and get out of my head. And I go by set more than anybody else. I'm like, what are you guys doing? What's going on over here?
Yeah.
Is that a coping mechanism?
I think so.
Does it help you make it feel like less real so it doesn't hit you as hard that you get to see them working on it on set?
There may be something there. I don't know. I still cry watching dailies. So what are you going to do?
Yeah. I just barrel through. I'm just like, I'm on for this ride. I know it's going to be, it's one of the great things if I think about our job is that you're going to be on this show for this amount of time. You just put your head down, you get through it, have all the feelings, put your whole heart into it, and then you're done. And then you can like go home and sit on the couch and eat Ben and Jerry's or whatever, go to the gym. And,
Yeah.
I
was on so many seasons of Sons of Anarchy that I was like, this was not actually the worst one that I ever did. Mm-hmm. Like, cause sometimes on Sons, you would literally get the script and be like, who writes this stuff? And then it was like, oh, Kurt Sutter. Sorry, I forgot. It was, so yeah, I don't actually, even like some of the worst storylines, I had to kill Opie, like I was good.
I like making people cry too. So I get some joy out of like put my stuff into it and then get to listen to other people cry about stuff.
Well, it's good that you and Joey work together. Well, we've talked a few times about the idea of being technically accurate and how well the show adheres to that. You think about that in terms of dialogue and story points, but also sounds in this case. The emergency room sounds like the bridge of the Enterprise, except on the Enterprise, who cares what little beeps and boops and buzzes are happening? Here, every buzz and every beep means something. I'd love to know about the sound design work you do in general, but also any additional attention you have to pay to things like that, the authenticity of a sound effect.
Joe Sachs.
Yeah.
He comes to the sound spot.
Well, I just posted actually a picture of Brian Parker, who was our sound supervisor, and Joe brought in a vascular Doppler to like get the right sound for that piece of equipment. And so like Brian and I were trying to get it to work to see what it sounded like. And he's like, no, this is where you do it on your wrist. So your pulse is here.
Yeah. And not just as simple as like, oh, that beep should be faster, but like to a very, very technical level, of where would you hear that next door?
Yeah. And that's again, John, like again, on the pilot, John was like very specific about that. So that we had a couple of on-set advisors. One of them's name is Tim. He plays a character named Tim in the show. He's one of the nurses. He's Nurse Tim. And so I brought Nurse Tim into my edit bay and said, listen to this cut and tell me how it does or doesn't feel like the real ER, because Tim also obviously works at an ER. And then I had Ambar, who plays Kim, who also is a nurse on camera, and when she did her shift to record her ER, so we could have those sounds to inspire the sound design done by our assistants. And so all that stuff worked. And then the final swing was Joe being like, it doesn't sound like that. That's hysterical. Why would you think it would sound like that?
In keeping with the kinetic energy of the show, or maybe more to the point, contributing to it, is the handheld camera that is almost always in motion. I'd like to know whether this was shot as a true single camera or maybe it was a multicam. But either way, do you find that style harder or easier to cut with because of the motion that's happening often on both sides of the cut?
They were very upfront with us when we started to not shy away from the dirty frames, to kind of make it feel more organic and documentary-like. So it really wasn't that hard for us to use because we're not trying to make a super polished, beautiful, elegant set piece or anything. We intentionally, or at least I do, intentionally hunt down these sort of messy transitions or moments where the camera does have to kind of duck down in between people working on somebody. Like, it adds to the pacing, especially since we don't have anywhere to hide with pulsing score or anything like that. Like, it helps us amp up the intensity of these scenes. We do shoot 2 cameras most of the time. Later in the season, when we hit the mass casualty, they went up to 3 cameras. But these camera operators are just, they know exactly where to be and how to duck around the actors doing their work. And it really adds a kinetic momentum to everything they do.
So I usually wrap the show up by asking editors about their favorite scene or episode to cut. I'm not going to do that today. With good reason. It's inspired by Dr. Robbie, because he talks about how he never forgets the patients he's lost in spite of saving so many more. So in honor of Dr. Robbie, I can't really ask you about the ones you've lost or if they didn't turn out the way you wanted, but what were the hardest patients in terms of scenes you had to work out?
Let's start with Annie, because she got crushed by mass casualty as your first episode. Like, hey, Annie, why don't you walk into this series and cut the mass casualty with 3 cameras running the whole time with no resets?
And have a massive LA wildfires.
Oh, yeah.
Can you do that over the holidays in 9 days? That'd be super. We'd love that.
That was it was originally a 10-day shoot down to 7 because of the fires. It was wild. I mean, thanks, Mark, for that. And it was like 3 cameras. And but again, that to me, I think it was best case scenario when Terry was like, this episode is, we want you to do this one. And it's like right up your alley. It's really depressing and sad. And
Don't worry, you're going to love it.
But and to Joey's point, I love sloppy cutting. I love jumping a line. I love chaos. So for me, it was easy to be like, oh, I love this messy, and just like string it all together and be like, there's your wild ride.
What director was that? A Damien one?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And he was fun too because he was so loose and just like, yeah, do what you want. Maybe get a little bit. He was really great to work with and so inspiring.
Yeah.
In a very easygoing way.
Well, Noah Wiley had said something to me about some directors being gatherers, that they like to go out and sort of gather all their little pieces and it is more organic for them. And he said Damien's a hunter. I cut 2 of his episodes. I thought that was very accurate, in the best way.
Who's having trash pickup day?
That would be me. They're also working on my garage and pretty much anything else you can think of.
Mark, how about you?
Sorry. My father passed away. And so episode 4, the final scene, impossible to cut. And I think it's an incredibly well-written scene by Noah. And I spent a lot of therapeutic time going through the dailies, trying to parse how I felt about it versus how our characters felt about it. And, Annie was very kind. She said it really showed up in the cut, and I appreciated that. And it was hard.
Mark, thank you for sharing that, because to me, the most blessed thing about editors is that we do once we get the stuff, you've got to put your heart into it, in a way that moves the cut in a way that feels authentic to anybody watching. And if, that's like a talent, you have to put your heart into it. And I think everybody on this show did exceptionally well. We all did.
Mark, you and I have talked about it, but like I've lost both of my parents, and I always felt like in all of our storytelling that we do, grief or grieving is one of those things we don't talk about. And yet your only options are to die so young that you never lose anybody, or be a sociopath, in which case you don't care. And most of us don't fall into those 2 categories. So most of it's something we will experience. And I did actually think, again, that our show was doing a little bit of a service and kind of like putting that out there, because these people are going to be in contact with, our main characters and our healthcare workers are going to be in contact with people on some of the worst or most difficult days of their life, and to take that responsibility seriously.
Yeah. And I think that to your earlier point or question, Matt, was about what this show says about the medical workers and sort of what it's saying in general. But I think so many of the patient stories are just so human. You will relate to some of these characters in a way that you'll be really surprised by. Or I was really surprised by. And the jerks in the writer's room are just dialing it in, oh, who's got little children? Let's kill an 8-year-old. Oh, who's got this? Let's do, you just can't believe it.
Or even characters that you think at the beginning that you don't like. Not that you don't like the actor, but that you don't, think that that's a good character. And then 3 episodes later, you found some way to humanize.
I don't know. That Sean Hattasy always rubs me the wrong way.
He's a real pain, that guy. That guy's footage is tough to cut.
All right, Joey, on the real pain note, you're the last one to go here. What was the hardest one for you?
We talked a little bit about it earlier, but I got the double whammy of 8 and 11, which was the drowning girl, the honor walk, and then the birth sequence in 11. So the girl that drowned was 6 in the show, and my sons turned 6 a month after I was done with that episode, which I didn't think that was really going to be an issue, but I kind of did it to myself. I saved all the really sad stuff for the last day because I kept putting it off. So I had to get through honor walk. I had to get through telling the mom that the girl drowned, and it was right at the end. And even though I can see them say cut and the girl sits up, while I'm in the shot, it's 100% real to me. And I'm I just can't have anybody walk in right now. And, like Mark said, you can't help but see yourself or your family or anything in these situations because they are so real. And it was exhausting. And it's kind of hard to go home at the end of the day after sitting in front of a computer in a chair and just being I can't do anything. I'm exhausted, because it just doesn't really seem like it would do that to you, but it's tiring in a way I've not really experienced working on a show before.
Well, I had that scene where Frank got the, after the kid does die, the next episode, Much Was Mine, he calls his wife and is can you just put our son on the phone? I just need to hear his voice. So I kind of wondered, were you doing that? Were you calling your wife? I'm just
totally.
Hey, I just want to.
I definitely hung out with them more that week than I had the previous, for sure.
Okay, last question. You have a big cast of characters, as we've talked about. Lightning round. Who do you most relate to and why?
Ooh.
Quite a lightning round, guys. How about some quick responses? I'm going to go with Robbie, only because we're about the same age. And every time I walked on set, they thought I was his body double for some reason because I didn't shave. And Robbie has a beard. And I was I'm the editor. What are you talking about? I'm not going to go over there. But I would have to say Robbie, only just because of his running around and trying to balance everything. And that's what we're doing in the edit bay, and trying to keep all the dishes spinning.
I'm going to say I have not me personally, but I'm going to put Mel up there because I have a direct family member who got a perfect score in the SAT, and his brain kind of works in that special way. It's special in one way and special in the other ways. And so again, I will never not love her because of that. It's seeing a group of people represented in that way.
I'll be super annoying and say that the hospital, because to me it's community.
You're so annoying, Amy.
I love it. That's not annoying.
Weird, meta answer, but to me it's the community and the hospital itself, right? Or the ER itself is that's what it takes a village kind of thing. So that's my jam.
And I actually, the most interesting, I would say, I found cutting Santos the most interesting, because on surface, she is in so many ways masculine and trying to portray herself as masculine, but underneath is actually one of the most feminine characters. And of course, the actress is doing such an interesting job. So there you go. And Whitaker, because, who doesn't need a little Whitaker in their life?
Whitaker is my answer, because I feel that's exactly how I would be in these situations. Deer in headlights, just lost all the time. As much as I love horror movies and gore and stuff, anything real like this, it just I can't hang.
Those are all excellent answers. For me, I'm a Kraken, but that's just me. So
You love to pee on people, Matt. I get it.
I couldn't think of a better way to close the show. Okay, the show kind of took a weird turn there at the end. If you've seen The Pit, you understand about the Kraken. And if you haven't, well, this episode definitely ended with a bit of an R. Kelly vibe. You see, I told you this show had everything, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you learned a thing or two about editing, about healthcare, about teamwork, and who knows, maybe you learned something about you. So won't you please join me in extending a big thanks to Mark, Annie, Lauren, and Joey for sharing their wit and wisdom here on the podcast. And of course, I also want to thank you for investing your precious time listening to The Rough Cut. If you have a little time left over, I think you would get a big return on your investment learning all the latest that Media Composer has to offer. You will be a more productive and, dare I say, even happier editor. Script sync, phrase find, bin sharing, Animat, Fluid Morph, amazing trim tools. These are all things that pro editors rave about when they talk about Media Composer. And it is time you started speaking their language. So get on over to the Media Composer page on evad.com and see all the latest and greatest with Hollywood's preferred editing system. And if you prefer to save a click or two, just hit that link I put in the show notes. Well, that is a wrap for today's show. As always, it was an honor and a privilege hanging out with you. Let's do it again, shall we? Until whenever that is, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.